Well, hello everyone. Good day and welcome to our Twitter Space event, Copernicus Supporting Europe's Renewable Energy Goals. This event is hosted by the Copernicus Atmosphere Monitoring Service and the Copernicus Climate Change Service, which are implemented by the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasts, ECMWF, who are our hosts today here on Twitter, on behalf of the European Commission. My name is Dimitri Papadakis, and I am delighted and honoured to be the moderator of today's event. This event is part of the EU Green Week, which is an annual event giving citizens and stakeholders in Europe an opportunity to debate on European environmental policy. And the event is a week long, as the name suggests. So it's still running. It started on the 30th and it will be running till the 5th of June. So you still have the weekend. And there's obviously a major conference at the beginning with multiple side events and various panels that you can join to engage with European environmental policy. And with the Green Deal, of course, being at the heart of the policy packages that are being discussed. Now, today's discussion is all about renewable energy. And the fact is that at the moment, as many of you are no doubt aware, we find ourselves at a very critical juncture in the climate emergency. It is 2022, and we only have a few years left to act and prevent global warming beyond the 1.5 C limit, which was set out in the Paris Agreement. And the EU Green Deal wishes that we have a carbon neutral Europe by 2050 in support of that agreement. And so a transition to renewable energy sources is going to be very much a part of that carbon neutralization. And of course, this energy transition at present is being made all the more pressing by the war in Ukraine, which has precipitated a crisis of energy of its own right. And Europe is bracing itself for the impact of a swift reduction in fossil fuel consumption over the next decade, which we've just been hearing these declarations just in the last few weeks and days, in fact. So this is now very much at the front and center of European policymakers' minds. Now, renewable energy has moved from being an alternative power source to being really a core element of it. So we see it that it is poised to play an increasingly important role in Europe's future energy mix. So today, with us on our Twitter Space panel, we have a collection of speakers, each of whom are experts in their field and who have interesting views and insights to bring to this discussion around how the Copernicus program can support Europe's renewable energy goals. So I'd like to introduce the panel to you today. First of all, from the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasts, we have Carlo Buontempo and Melanie Ades. Carlo and Melanie, would you say hi?
Hi, pleasure to be here on the panel.
Thank you, Carlo. And Melanie?
Hi, I'm Melanie. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Hello. And we also have with us Sean Collins from the International Renewable Energy Agency. Sean, could you tell us in just a couple of lines what IRENA does and what is your role?
Hello, yeah, thank you very much, Dimitri. It's great to be here. Yeah, I'm Sean Collins. I'm an energy systems modeler with the International Renewable Energy Agency. And IRENA is the foremost international intergovernmental agency to promote renewable energy across various different elements, such as in terms of policy, in terms of financing, and in terms of technology development. And I'll be speaking to you today here in my role as energy systems modeler and understanding the role of renewables in the energy systems of tomorrow.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Sean, for that introduction. With us also on the panel, we have a climate services startup called Climate Scale, represented by Ana Lopez. Ana, could you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, hello. Thank you, and very nice to be here. I am a co-founder of Climate Scale, which is a small small company providing bespoke climate services to a variety of clients. And here today to talk about our experience in trying to translate climate data and climate information to a variety of people to be able to evaluate the impacts of climate change.
Super. Thank you very much, Anna. And last but very much not least, we have a representative from the German Aerospace Center, DLR, Marion Schröter-Homscheid. Marion, could you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. This is Marion. Actually, I'm working in the energy program, energy research program at DLR, and I'm an energy meteorologist. So I was trained as a meteorologist, done a lot for the space program on all the satellites and all what we do, and I'm now supporting the energy transition in the energy program. And yeah, by that we help to go for 100% renewable energies.
Excellent. Thank you, Marion. Well, as I'm sure you can see, to all of you listening, you certainly hear it, we have a very good group here to discuss this subject. So I'd like to start off with a question to Sean. Sean, Irena, your role is, very much around maintaining an overview of the situation of the global energy mix. Can you give us an idea of the scale of the renewable energy challenge? What does the energy mix look like right now, and what kinds of changes will be needed to address the energy crisis?
Yeah, of course. Happy to. What is the scale of the renewable energy challenge? It is a challenge, most certainly, due to the significant reliance we do have on fossil fuels today. But it also is a significant opportunity to actually reduce that reliance, reduce emissions, and actually promote renewables, which create more domestic energy sources, corresponding domestic industry, and actually reduce the outflow of payments to various fossil fuel producers across the world. So in 2020, we actually, in Europe, hit our renewable energy target. We actually exceeded it. It was 22%, whereas the goal was 20%. So so while there's been, it has been a challenge to actually scale this up, significant progress has been made. And in 2020, Europe recorded its greenest every year for electricity, where renewables accounted for about 38% of the electricity mix, with only 37% for fossil fuels. But of course, action is needed due to the level of fossil fuel dependence still in the fossil fuel system, or in the energy system as a whole. And actually, there are a series of shorter term and longer term actions that can be done to achieve this. And in the short term, the deployment of new wind and solar projects need to be accelerated, and this will help reduce the dependence on natural gas. Firstly, primarily in the energy system, in the power system in particular. So this needs to be accelerated with a fast tracking of the permitting processes. In addition, in the shorter term, the power generation for bioenergy and nuclear need to be maximized to further reduce this reliance on fossil fuels. And this while challenging, this could facilitate higher shares of renewables, and in further electrification measures such as speeding up the replacement of natural gas boilers with heat pumps will also reduce the fossil fuel dependence, and also increase renewables through increased electrification. So, and in the longer term, what we see in our longer term analysis in terms of looking at the pathways to net zero emissions and increase, it ultimately leads to very high shares of renewables in the power sector, and then using that to help decarbonize the other sectors, such as through the deployment of heat pumps, which have far higher efficiencies than natural gas boilers. Whereas a natural gas boiler can hit up to over 90% efficiency, or about 90%, a heat pump can hit 300% efficiency based on the electricity you put in. You can pull additional energy from the atmosphere out, which actually increases it to such a level. So, and in our longer term roadmaps, by 2050, globally, we see that it'll become the main energy carrier. So, and that will go from about 21% of total final energy consumption in 2018 to over 50% in 2050. And this is indeed a significant challenge. And of course, policy to develop this will be required. We also see a significant role for bioenergy going forward, which will take about 18% of final consumption by 2050. And then also hydrogen and its derivatives will be very important in producing, in meeting energy demand in hard to decarbonize sectors, which cannot be readily electrified or readily use other renewable energy sources. So, and this could include sectors like shipping and aviation. But such changes, while drastic in the energy system, will deliver long-term benefits for Europe in this regard. We cannot slow down. We've achieved our target for 2020, which is good. We've set an ambitious target of 32% for 2030, with the potential for upward revision in 2023. But we need to accelerate to further increase renewables in the system, and because a lot of it, and take the measures to reduce the structural dependence there is for fossil fuels.
Wow, thank you, Sean. Well, that's a lot of information to digest there, but I think what I've taken away from that is that we're talking about something about 20% in 2018 from renewables, and we need to get that up to about 50% in the next decade or so. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, yeah. Certainly in the power sector, yes, we'll look to accelerate more on that, and it's kind of a twofold issue. It's increasing the use of electricity and increasing renewables in electricity, which and advancing that process.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. Great. Well, thank you for that. So I think you've set the scene now for the rest of this discussion, which we now need to get there, and how can we do that? So I'd like to turn now to Marion and ask, what are some of the challenges of solar power generation?
Well, I think, turning to renewables, of course, solar power is one very big player in that. And I mean, first idea you have, solar is not always there. I mean, okay, nighttime is one thing, that's obvious, but also if it's very cloudy, then it's less radiation, and therefore we have less production. And the same in similar is for wind, where we have varying conditions. So this idea that you cannot switch on and off the power plant, what you used to have before in the system, it was a management process of the owners of the power plant. Now nature is taking over to a certain part, and we have to deal with it. Yeah, these grid operators and everyone wants, of course, to have a very stable energy supply system, and we have to learn how to deal with that. So we're talking about solar resources. We need to know where is how much solar, same for wind and bioenergy and all the other renewables. So having this idea of solar resources, to know where they are, at which location, how much, how variable it is, and how to forecast it, what's going on the next 2 minutes, the next few hours, tomorrow. That's a task we have to fulfill, and you can obviously guess from your daily experience that meteorologists play a role in that. Yeah, that's our daily job of saying what's going on tomorrow. Can I go out for my picnic over there? So yeah, that's the same story behind. And the people interested, of course, everyone is interested in security of electricity and energy supply. But imagine you are the owner of a power plant. Yeah, you want to know in advance where's the best place to invest my money. Yeah? Now I'm owner of a power plant now. Imagine you want to know if it's working properly. Is it doing the job, or do I have to go to the manufacturer and say, oh, there's something wrong? Yeah, so you need an idea what would be possible in advance, but then when the power plant is running, to control it. And the third main user is really public authorities. Jean was telling about it, setting the floor, making proper policies, making proper regulations, help all the actors, the investors, the owners, everyone, home-owned system, large-scale, utility-scale systems, all those actors need to have good market conditions, good business model arrangements, good policies, no blockage of bureaucracy somewhere. All these kinds of things have really, there are a lot of changes needed when turning the system, as we do now in the whole energy field. And for doing so, you need to have a scenario. What are the natural resources? What are my policies? What are the people doing? And if you're changing that, you look into the future. You need a scenario. And for that, you need data, to make really thorough and valid and robust decisions. Yeah, and that's what we try as energy meteorologists to support.
Wow, Marion, well, thank you. That is enlightening. And I must confess that before we met, I had not a clue that this kind of a job title existed, energy meteorologist. But there you are. So you've outlined how it's very important to treat these resources as something which we need to be able to forecast. And in the same way as we would look at a weather forecast, we need to be able to look at a forecast of solar production or a forecast of wind production. I'm just going to turn now to Anna, who is in charge of a climate services startup. And I just want to ask you, Anna, can you comment on some of the challenges precipitated by climate change actually linked to the generation of renewable energies?
Well, what we see based on our experience trying to provide the climate service, so basically trying to provide data, information, and guidance to evaluate the physical risk of climate change, is that there is more and more people interested in this kind of information, mainly for two reasons. One is that there are new regulatory frameworks like the EU taxonomy that sort of oblige them to look at the climate risks and identify the climate risk of in their investments and in their current assets and in the projected investments. And once if there are climate risks, they have to propose adaptation measures, so propose how they are going to deal with these risks. And also, no, equally important, I think, is that a lot of people is really realizing that they need to adapt to the impacts of climate change. It's not something theoretical anymore, something that is going to happen in 20 or 30 years. Is something much more close to home. From our point of view, there are a few challenges to do this, and many are related to data and the availability of data, and I'm pretty sure Carlo and Melanie are going to talk about that. But also there is a lot of work to be done in terms of interpretation of the data. So all the data is very new. People has to understand what climate models provide, what are projections of climate models, what are the uncertainties, and also another important thing is how to make decisions with that data, how to use that data. Many people come to us and asking us, okay, can you tell us what other people is doing, because they don't know where to start.
Superb, thank you for that. So, I mean, that's a view then from really the coal face of the sort of climate risk nexus, with people who are trying to understand how their assets are going to be at risk from climate-related issues. So I think what we've got here is a situation where, you know, the time is now. There's no more waiting. We've got policymakers struggling to build policies around these topics. We've got power plant managers and investors trying to figure out where they should put their money and how they can build out renewable energy power systems. And the key seems to me to hide inside this question of having good sources of information about the availability of these resources, so that we can deal with the fluctuations, which are natural fluctuations, in wind resources and in solar resources. So this sets the scene very much for a question to our collaborators at the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasts, ECMWF, which is the organization entrusted by the European Commission to run the Copernicus services for atmosphere monitoring and for climate change monitoring. So I'll turn to Carlo Bontempo and Melanie Ades now. Carlo and Melanie, can you tell us, how can environmental data such as that provided by the Copernicus services help this transition to green energy or to green energy production?
Yeah, thank you, Dimitri, for your introduction. And maybe I should say a bit more on who I am, because at the beginning of this live, I just said hello without introducing myself. I'm the director of the climate change service at ECMWF. And I see our role really as the provider of reliable data that can be used as a starting point. So I want to use the words of an wind energy engineer that joined one of those Twitter live a few weeks ago. And he thanked us for providing access to all sorts of data that he needs in his job. So observation from the past, reconstruction of the past weather event, prediction of what's coming the next season, and projection for the future. And this is really related to what you were saying a minute ago about not only climate change, but also the variability. So we have one annual publication that normally has some echo in the press, that is the European State of the Climate Report. And this year was released in April. And if you look in this year actual issue, we have reported a specific event that is very much related to renewable energy, and was this wind drought. So if you look at a good swath of Northern and Western Europe, in 2021, the wind was well below the average wind. Now, it's not so much, I mean, there is a question of whether these events are becoming more or less frequent because of climate change, but there is also a very important element, and it's just to understand the impact that the natural variability has on the climate system. So if you don't have a significant fraction of renewable energy coming from wind, you just don't worry too much if a year is less windy than another. But if all of a sudden you rank in the maybe lowest 1% of the distribution of years in terms of wind, well, this matters. It really reduces the ability to produce electricity. So I guess just to summarize, the key element we offer is this understanding, the data that allows us to manage our energy mix that is becoming more and more dependent on climate, more directly dependent on climate. And this is true for wind, as we've seen in 2021. But as Marion was saying a minute ago, it's true for solar, and it's true for hydro as well. So is having this underpinning information that allows us to manage the risk more efficiently.
Thank you, Carlo. And before I turn to Melanie, I want to add that on Twitter Spaces, for those of you listening along here, and first of all, may I also add that we welcome all of you. Thank you very much for being with us today. We have pinned some tweets to the top of the discussion here, which are kind of background or contextual information related to what our speakers have been talking about. And you will find a reference there to the Copernicus, the European State of the Climate Report, which is a production of the Copernicus Climate and Atmosphere Monitoring Services, which Carlo was referencing there. So please keep an eye on those pinned tweets and follow the links, because there's a lot of very rich information that we don't have time to cover all of during the discussion. And thanks, Carlo, for that overview. So if I can ask Melanie to elaborate a little bit. So what do the Copernicus services provide to the renewable energy industry? I mean, in a nutshell, what data are we actually talking about here, and how can that data be accessed?
Thanks, Dimitri. Yeah, so just to introduce myself a little bit more, I am a senior scientist at ECMWF, and I am part of the Copernicus Atmosphere Monitoring Service, what we call CAMS for short. So ECMWF managed different services. Obviously, Carlos is the director of the Climate Change Service, and I work as part of the Atmosphere Monitoring Service. So we produce information that's related to air pollution and health, greenhouse gases and climate forcing. And in particular, for this discussion, we release information on solar energy. And this is information that is validated and examined in quite a lot of detail to sort of verify its quality. And there are two parts of my role that have relevance to renewable energy. And the first is that I'm the technical lead for this solar radiation service, which we run as part of CAMS. And this means that I manage the ECMWF parts of running this service. And so what do we release as part of this solar radiation service? the data we release for this is historical time series of information about the amount of solar energy that is reaching the Earth's surface. And we release this at user-specified locations. So we talked before about power plants and how they need information to sort of best optimize their services. So one example might be that a power plant wants to open a new site for their solar energy, but they've got various different sites in mind, and they need to know which site has historically had the most solar energy. And so they can turn to our service and they ask for historical data, and we can give them historical data for those 3 different sites they have in mind, and then they can look at that and see what best matches their requirement. So that's an example of the type of data that we might release to them. And we have different sort of streams of that data. We have solar radiation data across the globe that assumes a clear sky, but we also, obviously, clouds play a big part in how much solar radiation will reach the surface. And for that, we need satellite data on what the clouds have actually been. So we also have this cloudy sky service that we have, where we've got satellite data of where clouds have been in the past, and we have that for Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, as well as the North Atlantic, and we're looking at extending that in the future to further satellites where we have the data on the clouds. So that gives you an idea of the sort of data that we produce as the Copernicus services.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Melanie and Carlo, for presenting to us what is offered by the Copernicus services in respect to wind resources, to solar resources specifically, as you were talking about there, Melanie. Before we move on, I would like to just open the floor in some sense a little bit to just tell our listeners that there are a few different ways that you can interact here. There is a function for reacting using a sort of emoji type reaction to things that you've heard and things that people are talking about. So please feel free to use those buttons. Then there is also the option to request to speak, and you can ask us questions. Now, we're not opening the floor just yet. We will do in a couple of questions time, but look out for the button on the bottom left, which is your key to requesting permission to speak and ask a question. And we will moderate those requests and let you ask your question. And I think that if you wanted to type, you can also post a tweet into the Twitter space using the button on the right. I have to confess that we are quite new at this Twitter Spaces, these features that are offered, but I think it's settling in rather nicely, and so we're very pleased to have you all here and looking forward to your interactions. All right, so we've heard now from the Copernicus services, in a sense, what is offered. Now I'm going to turn back to Ana Lopez, who has a very important role, in a sense, in transforming some of those outputs into things that are more specialized and more useful on the ground. So Ana, you are in a climate services startup called Climate Scale, and I have to tell you that Climate Scale was featured as part of the Copernicus Climate Change Service showcases. So it is a project running under the C3S, and there is a page dedicated to them, which we will pin for you, so you can have a look at what Climate Scale is doing. But Climate Scale is a sort of a related or sister entity to Vortex, which is your sister company on wind resource modeling. So could you tell us a little bit about Vortex and about Climate Scale and how you use Copernicus data?
Yep. So Vortex, as Dimitri said, is a company that provides information for the wind, specifically for the wind resource, for the wind energy industry. It was created about 15 years ago. And basically what Vortex does is takes the reanalysis from ECMWF, ERA 5, and use dynamical downscaling. They use a model, a weather model, to take the information in ERA 5 to much higher resolution. So they are able to provide information at the wind farm scale, and they provide many different products for different phases of the development of a wind farm or the operation of a wind farm. And they, as I said, they use everything is based on ERA 5 data, and they basically focus on the past. So they produce information that is necessary, for instance, in a due diligence process to obtain the funding or the investment to develop a wind farm. The Climate Scale is a spin-off of Vortex. We with some colleagues created it about 3 years ago as a spin-off from Vortex, and the idea of Climate Scale is, instead of looking at the past, look at hindcast, looking at the future, and provide information for high resolution information for a series of different clients that are interested in evaluating the physical risk of climate change. And as I said before, at the same time, we provide support to analyze the data, to interpret the data, which is something that in our experience is as important as the data itself. One thing that I would like to mention is that I think you mentioned, Dimitri, is that when we started 3 years ago, we received the support of Copernicus Climate Change Service Use Case Program, which was part of the C3S aim to promote the development of new services for the benefit of society. And with this financial support, we were able to develop a prototype, which was something like our initial viable product, and explore what 3 years ago was a very, very, very incipient market of climate services in the context of climate change projections and physical risks, right? Obviously, there have been climate services for many, many years. If we consider also, I don't know, meteorological services, but this is specifically in the context of climate change, projections of climate change impacts on different sectors. And this was very, very useful to us because it allowed us to get in contact with a series of people and have very, very fruitful discussions about what exactly was needed, what kind of products they needed, and as I said, develop our first prototype. And now, since then, we've been using data, store data, including ERA 5 satellite data, other observational data sets for our products.
Thank you, Anna. So this is, this is fascinating because clearly this whole science of kind of modeling the environment, modeling the atmosphere, modeling the available resources is a highly specialized field. So I can see how it would be very important for the information, the raw data, if you like, coming from services like the Copernicus services would need to be interpreted and explained. You need these interlocutors to go and talk to the power plant managers and the investors and all these other actors who are becoming more and more sensitized to the need for this kind of information. How have you seen, you mentioned at the time, you called it an incipient market. What's been the scale of change for the demand in services like the ones that you and Vortex are offering in the years that you've been operational?
In the case of Vortex, I think it is an ever-growing demand. There are people trying to develop wind power everywhere in the world, and there are many, many, many sites to be explored and evaluated in terms of resources. And obviously, Vortex is a technology company, so there are also new and different products that can be developed following what is new in science and what new methodologies, approaches, can be developed according to the ever-growing science. But and from the point of view of climate scale, so specifically for physical impacts of climate change, what we notice is that there have been, maybe 2-3 years ago, people was very curious about what might happen. So it was more curiosity than a real need, but there was a sort of explosion over the last maybe 6 months, a year, and I think it is very much related to changes in regulatory frameworks. So, for instance, the European taxonomy of sustainable commercial activities requires that different sectors, in particular the energy sector, and in particular the renewable energy sector, has to report on what are the potential risks that are posed by climate change in assets and operations and resources, of course. Obviously, in the case of renewable energies like solar, hydro, and wind, evaluating the potential impacts of climate change on the resource is as important as evaluating the potential impacts of climate change on the infrastructure or the operations and management. So what we see is that in the last 6 years, a year or 6 months, because of changes in the regulation, many people is interested in many people has to report on the physical impacts of climate change. So it has moved from, in the last 3 years, from, I would say, curiosity to a more real need.
I see. Okay, so I mean, and of course, I think what you're saying to me is that relatively small changes in regulation can result in an incredible uptick in the need for data and information. I think if you couple that with the ongoing and pre-existing energy crisis and the new challenges that have arisen just since February the 24th, we are going to see a great deal more demand for these kinds of information services relating to renewable energy resources. So I'd like to turn now back again to Marion, because Marion's working with stakeholders in industry, in the solar industry. She can, of course, elaborate herself on a specific role within the C3S, but if you could, in CAMS. But tell us about the needs and wants of the solar industry. Tell us about the challenges that your partners and contractors are facing.
Yeah, well, let me tell you a bit more what really is the big challenge for our energy supply. I mean, imagine before we had a lot of large-scale power plants, and what we call the transmission grid operators. Those are really the big players, all those power transmission lines you see if you drive around. These are balancing out nowadays large-scale power plants. But now imagine what we are doing. We are having lots of home-owned PV systems on our rooftops. We're having heat pumps. Sean was already introducing that. We're having e-mobility, which is not just a car. It can also be a bicycle or a trolley or whatever. And this is a lot of small-scale producers and consumers. And these scales are changing. So we turn into a complete different role in an actor which is called the distribution grid operators. That's these companies you make a local contract to get electricity out of the grid. And they get a much larger role. They will be responsible for your heat supply with a heat pump, or for your mobility instead of the gas station before. So these actors are coming into a field, getting a complete new role and responsibility. And imagine, we just had a meeting yesterday with the grid operator from a neighborhood town called Bremen here, a medium-scale town. They're already now having about 4,000 such devices in their grid and taking now responsibility to monitor that or even to control it in future. And this is happening everywhere. And I mean, that's just already now. So imagine we are going for very large shares of renewables. So the amount of devices will increase. That's a big data challenge. So big data includes data challenge. For us as CAMS providers here, this also means higher resolution data. regional data, not just aggregated over half of Germany, but now we really need each area, at least each neighborhood, aggregated to one value of what's going on there, or even final resolution. That's not absolutely clear, but certainly it's not half of Germany aggregated anymore. And this really calls for higher resolution data. I mean, from space, we have upcoming Meteosat third generation, which is a higher resolving meteorological next generation satellite. That will help us to some extent. And we have to make really best use out of that in the solar field. That's a challenge we will go into CAMS. And its launch of this new satellite is December this year. Operational will be next year, also we're preparing for that. We also, Mel already mentioned it, we are going for other satellites. I mean, now we talked about what we have here in Europe, yeah, as a citizen, but imagine you're a company like we heard from Anna, yeah? She has customers everywhere, or at least investors who want to invest everywhere. So going around the globe, using the other weather satellites, making use of them into a single service, a single access way for all the non-space meteor experts, where they just can get data in one-stop shop idea. Yeah, that's CAMS and Copernicus as well. We see also new technologies perhaps coming up, which are much more sensitive to either the spectrum, so not just the broadband radiation what we use nowadays, but the shorter and longer wavelengths, which behave a bit different. So this is a new requirement for us to look perhaps into spatial resolved data, spectral resolved data. Another point is that a lot of new technologies are taking more the account the diffuse radiation. So we need to have how the different directions, where's the radiation really coming from? Yeah, we will also put PV panels on facades. Then we need, meteorologically speaking, another part of the radiation field. Yeah. And that is a challenge for us, and our algorithms will incorporate that piece by piece. And the other point is speaking from the solar sector. I mean, we talk about a lot about solar radiation. This is okay because that's the main driver. But we also should not neglect that temperature, for example, is an issue. Yeah? The production is dependent of temperature, so we need to couple. The people expect one data set covering radiation and temperature. Then I want to have snow. Is there snow on the modules? I mean, it's falling down, that we know from meteorology, but how long does it stay over there? And what is the meteorological conditions that it now melts and slips down? And this is something in meteorology, we just say, oh, snow is falling, but what happens else? The solar people need to know when the panels are free. Same for dust deposition or pollen. Imagine that just imagine that some days during the year you have to clean your car, your windows, yeah. If you have to start cleaning that at home, that's the day that the PV operators are also concerned about. And also imagine it's a large scale pattern, yeah. Then all PV panels in a town are now covered by pollen. Also the grid operator want to know, yeah. So there's much more on, parameters from nature affecting the system overall, and partly we're covering that in a meteorological field. At Copernicus, we have to couple our data, which we already have. We also have to evaluate and really bring that together, and then also I think couple with people who can monitor what's happening and how long does it stay. Yeah. And I mean, we talked about resources up to now. Yeah, of course, they want to have real-time data, forecasts, what's going on tomorrow. So it's a big step forward we can go by supporting those communities. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Marion. I think that's absolutely enlightening to have the story told, if you like, from the beginning, as to how the systems of power distribution are changing, thanks to these newfangled ways of doing things. So small scale PV generation, people putting a solar panel on the back of their shed, that's an issue for the power distributor. And increasing dependence on electrically driven, both in mobility and in other areas, that's also a challenge for the electricity production system. And what you've described is fascinating, because of course, if a dust storm hits a city, then everybody has to go outside and clean their car windows. That's one thing, and that's maybe not mission critical. It might be in certain cases, but imagine then that your city's power was dependent on this distributed grid, and you're not just talking about going out into the yard. You have to climb onto your roof So that's a very different story. And I think this is
you
illustrative.
can hope for precipitation as well, but when is that the next, when it's coming, yeah? And to have the backup system already in place, yeah, be pre-warned, that's the point, yeah? That you, at that point, this is like a small outage, so be pre-warned, have your storage filled in time, know about what's coming. That's the story.
Right.
It's not about climbing on your rooftop. Don't be afraid you have to do that. Probably rain will do so, but the grid operator should know how long to wait for the rain, for example.
Exactly, and I mean, and these grid operators. I mean, it's one thing. A domestic system is probably not. But if you've got tens of thousands of panels, every layer of dust or particles there is going to make a difference incrementally to your overall production capacity. So it is important to understand how often these dust storms are going to be coming, or how frequent these events are in a certain period. And I think data is the heart of all of this. And I think you've described, and also Anna made reference to, the fact that it is necessary to look at these models as systems in development, which need to then be downscaled, made more accurate, made more regional. And I think a lot of that is we're seeing a lot more of that kind of work, that kind of industry coming to light now, driven by all of these policy priorities, driven by the climate emergency. I'd like to ask, maybe jump back to Carlo and ask if you can comment on all of these issues that Marion has raised, or add something there, perhaps. Carlo, I'm afraid we can't hear you.
Yes, quite right. I muted myself on the wrong side. Thank you. I was just saying that the reflection from Marion were very much highlighting an element that I think is crucial. And it's really the fact that the transition, the climate transition in this case, affects all parts of society. So it's not just the provider of renewable energy, is very much the grid operator, the transmission operators in Europe, with whom we are working more and more closely, who have different kind of questions. And Marion was reflecting to some of those, from the aerosol loading to the snow, but temperature itself is a big driver. So I guess one of the question is how the entire network will behave in a situation where temperature will be higher. So we know that you need to maintain the conductor at a certain temperature, and this depends on the amount of wind and the atmospheric temperature, and these are likely to change. So in designing the network of the future, we'll also need to consider that they will need to operate in a situation that is different from the situation that we are used to. Other elements that are important is the fact that we need climate data, as Melanie was mentioning. We need climate data to decide where to put the new capacity, where to install the new solar panel or the new renewable onshore and offshore wind farms. But then the question is, how do we bring the energy that these produce effectively to the rest of the network, and how we keep the network balance? So these are all new challenges for which the climate data is very much needed. And so if I can try, as you suggested, to draw a conclusion from all this input, I think that the key conclusion is to build on one of the fundamental principles of the Copernicus program, which is to be user-driven. So we are now at the beginning of a new phase of Copernicus. And one of the key elements we want to do is really to listen to our user. And our user is an expanding community, energy being certainly a key element of that community. And the expanding community comes with a new and interesting requirement. So we want to understand from these new requirements so that we can respond to those. So one of the key elements in the evolution of our portfolio over the next few years is the next generation of analysis. So we heard some references from many of the panelists today to ERA 5. This is the 5th generation of analysis, and is one of by far the most popular product that we provide access to. Now we are working on the ERA 6, the 6th generation, and this will start its production in 2024, will probably become available around 2027. And we want to know from the energy practitioner, from the transmission system operator, from all the people who are using our data, what differently we should do. What are the new elements that we should add? So just to be some of them may be more complicated, but there are also some very simple ones. So the fact that there is such a new community of wind energy user and producer and installer means that, for instance, having a better characterization of the wind field in the boundary layer is very important. So it's something we can work on. And so maybe I can almost bring back a question to the panelists or in general also to our audience today. And it's very much, what would you like us to do? what sort of product do you think we should focus on in the next few years? Because we are being quite proactive in reaching out to the community, but you can never be too much proactive, right? So if there is a new channel or a new user out there with whom we haven't yet engaged, we would love to engage and hear more about it.
Carlo, thank you very much for that, drawing back to the point of all of this, which is that the Copernicus services are evolving, they're dynamic, and they have the user at their heart. Sean, would you like to add your view on this?
Yes, of course. Yeah, as a user of the Copernicus data, I can really state its value and its use, certainly in terms of our work and other energy planners' work, in terms of long-term projections and optimization of the energy system. Because essentially what we do is we build models, we project the energy services demands out to the future, so like transport, industry, buildings use. And we say, under these certain assumptions, like if we're to go to zero, this is the technology mix that will take us there. And of course, it's important that these technologies do so reliably and actually openly, verifiably, in the way that the Copernicus data actually makes possible. And it actually is very useful in actually understanding the reliance of these different systems on the climate system underpinning them. So it's really valuable, and it's particularly useful in that it's open, it's free to use, and can be used for any study in any model, basically from a model built in Excel up to some professional software. So it really levels the playing field in terms of modeling in that way, and I think it's a really valuable contributor in that work. And we are actively using it in our forthcoming Africa continental study to look at the distribution of wind and solar farms across the continent and the levels of interconnection required in the longer term to bring this to fruition in conjunction with hydropower resources. So yeah, it's a very, very valuable resource. Yeah, look forward to more.
Thanks, Sean. Well, I'm sure there will be more, because that is definitely on the roadmap. More data, higher resolution, better frequencies, all of these challenges, all of these boundaries are being constantly pushed against, as I understand it, through the Copernicus Service Evolution, which is ongoing. As Carlo said, I mean, there are plans for next generation reanalysis and further improvements across the board. This is true of all the Copernicus services. It's especially true of the climate and atmosphere monitoring services. I would like to stop here and ask if our participants and listeners have any questions, because we've been talking amongst ourselves, and I was hoping that there would be some requests from the audience. I just see that we might have indeed something here, because we are already quite close to the end of our session, but I think we have time for one more question here from our audience. So I'm going to invite Yashvini Shukla to ask a question.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak. I was wondering what is the best way to contribute in terms of skill to the climate crisis? I would like to understand if there's a lack of skill in people who can understand the data from satellite imagery, or is it better to actually be an implementer and get on ground and I don't know, try to educate girls in Africa, or plant trees. So what's the best way to contribute in terms of skill?
Well, thank you. Thank you for that question. I think it's an excellent question. I wonder if, yes, perhaps Carlo, you could start us off?
Yes, I'm muting on the right side this time. Well, and clearly, if you ask a climate scientist what the missing or the missing skill set is, probably will say climate scientist, right? So I acknowledge my bias there, but and I don't think this is the only thing that is missing out there. Actually, a lot of other elements in terms of social dimension and connection to communities, I think, are essential. But from my biased standpoint, something we see when we, for instance, recruit people within the team is a shortage of analytical skill set, of people who can understand big data and can understand the physics of climate, people who can program and interface at the programmatic level with this data set. This is a shortage at this stage. So just I acknowledge my bias, and I don't think this is the only, by far, it's not the only thing that is missing out there in tackling the climate crisis. But if you see, and Anna was reporting this dramatic increase in the interest for climate data, and something we see ourselves throughout all sector, I think is an area that will require more and more of this capacity in the years to come. So certainly something to look into. Thank you.
Thanks. I think that answers my question.
Thanks. Yes. So I would ask Marion to also comment. I think she has her hand up.
Yeah, well, perhaps also part of the answer. I mean, I think I talked through a lot of different actors. I mean, I talked about investors. You can imagine they have very often economy as background. Then we have a lot of engineers in the field. We have a lot of different actors, and you can easily guess not all of them are trained as meteorologists, or nearly only a few of them. Yeah, so we need people who really get aware of that what they have been trained as, for example, as an engineer or as an architect or at university at their time or wherever they have any training for their job, whatever it is, not only universities. Yeah? That we need to open the mind of everyone to get sensitive that there's something out. We have to deal with nature. There's variability, to look into what are the effects of my problem where I'm trained for, and to search the collaboration among disciplines. So whatever you feel, I don't know in detail, of course, yeah, if you go this open-minded way, and if everyone does that, then we're coming together, because we have to, as was said, we have to change more or less the whole society life in all its aspects. And if everyone contributes and is open-minded to work with others, I think that helps most, whatever the individual role is. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for that question, Yashvini. I hope that you got some interesting food for thought here from our speakers. So we are now at just about to hit the 1 hour mark. I do believe we've run out of time today, but as I'm sure you can see, there is a lot more that can be said on this subject and its related sub-subjects. So I do hope that our listeners here are inspired to continue to follow the work of the Copernicus Climate Change Service, the Copernicus Atmosphere Monitoring Service, and the program as a whole. And I would like to extend a special thank you to our invited speakers, Sean Collins from IRENA, Anna Lopez from Climate Scale, Marion Schröter-Holmscheid from the DLR, the German Aerospace Center, and of course, with us as well are our hosts at ECMWF, Carlo Bontempo and Melanie Ades. Thanks to all of you for a really, really interesting and stimulating discussion. I hope you have a great afternoon, and I hope that we see each other further down the road.
Thank you.
Thanks, of course, to all our listeners. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you as well.